Let's get this debate going. Let me introduce our guest. Former U.S. diplomat George Lambrakis joins us from London, and from the International Action Center, Caleb Maupin joins us from New York. Gentlemen, welcome. Caleb Maupin, what do you think about the appointment of John Brennan as the CIA director?
Well, there's nothing particularly new about John Brennan's policies and his love of assassinating people. The CIA is a terrorist organization that functions to serve the Wall Street monopolists. It was formed shortly after the Second World War, and some of its first policies were the creating instability and chaos in Italy when it looked like an anti-U.S. forces might win the elections. The CIA brought down the government of Salvador Allende, a democratically elected government in Chile, and assassinated Salvador Allende, killing 20,000 innocent people in the process of that. All over the world, wherever people are demanding justice and fighting for things people want, like peace, jobs, democracy, and equality, the CIA goes in to defend the interests of Wall Street, to assassinate, to murder, and to commit chaos and crimes. So it's no surprise that John Brennan, who's kind of engineered it with this drone policy, which leads to thousands of innocent people being killed, it's no surprise that he's been put at the top of the CIA, because the CIA is an organization that serves Wall Street, that commits crimes against humanity, and really, I mean, that's what they're all about.
George Lambrakis, has John Brennan lied about the CIA assassination drone program?
I don't know what you're talking about, lying. You have to realize, as we all do, that governments, and particularly intelligence services, take, for example, the Iranian one, don't go around telling people exactly what they're doing. And if they do assassinate someone, as I'm sure you know others have, they certainly don't go bragging about it. But on the other hand, that's absolutely no way to describe what the United States has done by creating the CIA. I should remind the previous speaker, who's perhaps too young to remember, that the CIA was created after World War II only because it was realized in America that you needed such an organization because all the other major powers already had them. The Soviets had them for many years before World War II. The British, the French, the Germans, everybody had a CIA of their own, and the Americans felt they had to do it. However, saying that the head of the CIA doesn't reveal anything just because he's asked to reveal it doesn't mean he's lying in the usual sense, any more than the government of Iran would be lying if it didn't describe everything it's doing around the world, or any other government for that matter.
George Lambrakis, you bring in the government into Iran. We're talking about John Brennan and how he has said in the past that this drone program, assassination drone program, doesn't exist. But it surely does.
Well, there are times when people say we don't have spies in this country, when they do. That doesn't mean that you don't put them in charge of the program because they are covering something up if they are in a service which is supposed to be secret. After all, what do you expect the Secret Service to do? You have to realize Brennan does not make American foreign policy. The president does. Anything that is not agreed on, anything that has not already been ordered by the president has to go back to the president for a decision to be made. The CIA, like the State Department, like the Defense Department, carry out policy. But if they're going to make it in anything serious, they have to be sure that the president agrees with it. So, yes, Brennan undoubtedly did not come forth in the past saying what the drones were doing at a time when the drones perhaps were not understood to be doing what they're doing. But that has very little to do. He's a very good pick for CIA director, partly because he's got a lot of experience with it. He has agreed that some of the things that were done, for example, with the kinds of intelligence interrogation that took place, which, by the way, is done in many countries. Iran is no exception. Iran has some very terrible interrogation techniques. When I know that before the Shah fell, there was Savak. Under Savak, there were some very tough interrogation
trained by the CIA
techniques. The United States government pushed the Shah to get Savak to stop doing them, And they did stop the last year. And the same people doing this in Sabak were picked up by the new revolutionary regime to run their intelligence and internal control system. These are not the nicest things people do in the world.
We're going to talk about some of the nice things that John Brennan has done in his past, but Caleb
And they're
Maupin,
not something that you want to argue morally on, because we know what's true morally and not.
and I'm so glad that you bring up the word moral, because that's exactly what I'd like to hone in on regarding John Brennan a little bit later, George Lambrakis. But Caleb Maupin, this drone program, assassination drone program, well, it's going to be focused more domestically, isn't it, on Americans themselves. Tell us more about that, even though the U.S. government is not so keen on expanding on it.
That's you're jumping to a ridiculous conclusion.
It is interesting that drones actually have been used domestically. There are multiple states that have drone surveillance actually on the books, and that is an increasing part of the repression in the United States. Drones are being used for surveillance to attack political movements. And the CIA, which is officially only supposed to operate outside of the United States, actually has a history of operating inside the United States. Files have been released showing that the CIA took action against the anti-war movement in the 1960s and against organized labor. The CIA is an arm of Wall Street. You know, the other guest said that policy is set by the president. No, policy is set by Wall Street and the bankers. They're the ones that set the policy. And that's why whenever any government around the world starts standing up for its people and starts defying the will of the bankers and corporations, all of a sudden the CIA is going in and destabilizing and terrorizing it. I mean, how many times has the CIA attempted to murder Fidel Castro? Over 300 last time I checked. This is unacceptable. That's what the CIA is. The CIA murdered Che Guevara, and all over the world people love Che Guevara. You know, whether it's Asia, Latin America, everywhere people are looking up to Che Guevara as a symbol of the fight for equality and all the things that Wall Street and the bankers have fought against. Yet the CIA murdered Che Guevara. The CIA has committed so many ugly crimes against humanity. You know, any corner of the globe, you name it, whether, you know, Asia, Latin America, you know, all over the world, you know, the CIA has murdered people, and it speaks for Wall Street. And look what is the results they've gotten. You know, in Eastern Europe, the CIA staged all kinds of these color revolutions to bring down governments that were defying the United States. And what has the result been? Are the people of Eastern Europe any better off? No. Sex trafficking has gone up, drug addiction, poverty, unemployment. That's the result of the CIA's intervention around the world. Nowhere have they ever brought peace and stability. Everywhere they have created chaos. And that's why we have to stand against them, and that's why the people of the world loathe the CIA and admire people that they murdered ruthlessly, people like Che Guevara.
Very well. George Lambrakis, before you come in, let's take a look at some of our viewer comments that were posted on Facebook page for this debate. We're going to take a look at the first comment by Abby Jennings.
Drones are unconstitutional as well as inhumane from the inception to use. I'm horrified at the minds of the men in governments. War creates hate, no matter how one slices it, and peace can never come from it. No drones, no wars, and no more forced democracy.
George Lambrakis, no drones, no wars, and no more forced democracy. What do you think your answer would be to Abby Jennings, who wrote this?
Well, my answer is that if you'd rather have bombs than drones, you're going to kill a lot more people. A. B, what you said earlier, that most of the people killed by drones are innocent, is not proven by anybody. A number of things you have been spouting, and the person you spoke to, an American who thinks that the United States is run by Wall Street. I don't particularly like Wall Street any more than he does, but I am not stupid enough to think that Wall Street runs the United States of America. Now, that may sound like good propaganda on this particular program because you've chosen someone who likes to talk that way, but if you try to get to some of the facts for your listeners, I think you should stop sort of having the same line which says the CIA caused all the world's faults. It would have been better, according to the previous speaker, if the CIA had not stopped the Soviet Union and communism from taking over Europe. The world would have been a lot better if communists had taken it over. That's the only way you can explain what he said, but he hasn't gone to that point. Now, as far as your other speaker about drones goes, we've talked about drones on this program. This is my third time talking about drones. Drones are another type of weapon like missiles, which a lot of countries are preparing, like airplanes. Drones are supposed to cause more specific damage because they're smaller. They don't blow up as big an area. That doesn't mean that there's somehow terrible things that you cannot control. Drones are used when you cannot take over somebody, when the people that you're going after are in parts of the world where you cannot get at them, and the government, which is supposed to control them, cannot control them. The government of Yemen, the government of Pakistan, at times, in certain areas, is unable to keep its citizens from attacking American targets. So the Americans have to do it themselves. And drones are a very simple way of doing it, much better than sending in jet planes.
Right.
Or, for that matter, tanks, which would, of course, be much more of a violation of sovereignty.
Well, Caleb Maupin, if you have a response to Mr. George Lambrascus there.
Oh, of course. He raises this false dichotomy. It's either bombs or drones. I say self-determination. I say the people of the Middle East have the right to run their countries without Washington, D.C. and Wall Street intervening. And if they fight for their country and fight for national sovereignty and independence, the U.S. should stay out of there. And he says that Wall Street doesn't run the United States. I disagree with that. The people in the United States don't want another war in Syria. They don't hate the Iranian people. They want their mail to come on time. They want libraries and hospitals to stop closing down. That's what they want. All across this country, there's unemployment and there's suffering, yet there's more and more money for groups like the CIA, for things like this drone program that lead to people being murdered. And that's outrageous. The people of this country are clearly upset with the economic situation. It's Wall Street that wants wars. It's Wall Street that wants chaos. That's how it is. That's what's going on. And you look at this. He talks about, oh, the CIA prevented communists from overtaking Eastern Europe or overtaking Europe. Well, in Italy, the reason the communists could have won the election in Italy was because they had been the anti-fascist fighters. While the U.S. bankers were doing business with Mussolini and Hitler, the communists in Italy were resisting, and they were held in high admiration by the Italian public. And the CIA went in to prevent democracy because the Italian people wanted to elect communists to their government. All over the CIA, while the propaganda, he talks about propaganda, while the propaganda is that the U.S. loves democracy and freedom, whenever people want to vote in a government that the U.S. doesn't approve of, all of a sudden all that talk of democracy falls out. The CIA was absolutely involved in what happened in Venezuela, the coup attempt against Hugo Chavez, again, a democratically elected leader. Everywhere democracy doesn't serve the 1%. Everywhere democracy doesn't serve Wall Street, the CIA, the armed forces are there to enforce their will. That's what the CIA is all about. It is an armed wing of the capitalist government of the United States which serves Wall Street. That's what it is, plain and simple. And I will also point out, he mentioned SAVAK. SAVAK, the organization that served the Shah of Iran, was trained by the CIA, backed up by the CIA. In fact, there were so many in the United States during the Iranian Revolution, when Iranian students would go out to demonstrate against the Shah, they had to wear bags over their heads in the fear that the CIA would take their picture and send it back to Iran, and then their families would be tortured by SAVAK. So don't try to separate the CIA from what SAVAK did. The CIA is a criminal organization. Its crimes are well known to the people of the world, and the people of the world, like I said before, they admire Che Guevara. They admire the people who fight against U.S. imperialism, whether it's from the Pentagon, the CIA, or whatever
you're
forces.
Repeating
and this drone
yourself.
Policy is a murderous policy.
You're repeating yourself,
Wall
and you can go on all night. Please get a little education before you start throwing your ideas around. I realize you have very strong feelings, and you're just picking up whatever facts you can and creating facts that don't exist just to get your argument out. I'm sorry, this shouldn't be a war between two Americans on Iranian TV. I think you should learn a little more about how governments operate. You should know better than to say that Wall Street runs the government. You have absolutely no way of proving half of the things
Wall Street
you've
runs
said.
the United
You're
States.
just throwing
the banks
them
and the
out there.
corporations
They're
run the
ridiculous
Democratic and Republican
statements.
parties,
And
that is very
you have a
apparent to
point of
anyone who
view.
does any
You're a young
research.
man who's very angry.
I absolutely have a point of view, and I'm opposed to what this government does around the world. I'm opposed to the policies of murder going down. I'm opposed to it.
Let's switch gears.
This
Well,
government
I'm
is
opposed
absolutely
Let's switch
criminal.
gears.
This government of the United
And
States.
Gentlemen, let's switch
Millions
gears
of people
to
are
John
dead
Brennan.
I
from
don't
the
want
sanctions, from
the
the
US
bombing, from the
government
murder,
doesn't
from the
want to
continued support of
intervene in the Middle
Israel
East
that murders
any more than you
Palestinians.
do.
Everywhere the U.S. government has murdered people.
Very
We
well.
need to stand against it. We have a responsibility as people living in the United States to oppose the crimes our government are committing and to
Okay,
stand with the
that's
people of
fine.
the world against the crimes
Please
of the U.S.
stand for
government.
it.
That's our responsibility. We have an important responsibility. You know, I'm not going to be a good German and sit back while the government
How
commits
about the
crimes. I'm
crimes
going
of
to
other
stand and
governments? Do
speak
you have
against
any
what this government is
responsibility?
doing.
Let's look at what the CIA has done.
I live in
How
the
about
United
Let's
States.
look at what the
against
CIA has
country
done.
run
Gentlemen,
by the
Wall Street
Caleb
banks
Maupin,
and
Caleb Maupin, let me
corporations,
just
which are
address
committing
this to
crimes all
George
over the world.
Lambrakis.
And people.
Caleb Maupin, let me address this to George Lambrakis. The use of torture, secret prison system throughout the
Sure.
world, rendition policies, which effectively, circumvented the due process and outsourcing America's torture regime to client states. Are these prerequisites to be a CIA director?
Are they what?
Are they prerequisites to be a CIA
What was your
director?
question?
The question is the use of torture,
Of course
secret
not.
prison
And
system throughout the
That's
world.
a very silly way of asking the question, don't you think?
Well, John Brennan was
It's certainly not
appointed
a
to the CIA
prerequisite.
director.
The
This is what he was
prerequisite
involved
is
in.
to be. Okay, are you arguing with me, or do you want to hear an answer?
I'd like to hear your answer.
If what you're arguing, if you're discussing the program that was very tough interrogation, I agree. It has now been, it's decided, first of all, that it's probably not very effective. It probably is a little effective sometimes, but for the most part it isn't. It's morally wrong. The United States doesn't want to be in the torture business. Some of the techniques used, people have since decided they are torture. They are not being used anymore, any more than they are used in some situations overseas. But there are an awful lot of countries around the world that do torture people, and sometimes people get carried away. That's true. They shouldn't, and morally it's wrong. And the United States government believes it's wrong, and so does Mr. Brennan. Mr. Brennan was available at the time, knew what was happening. He is now in a position where he is going to carry out American policy. He doesn't make American policy, as I said earlier. He realizes that American policy under this president has moved from where it was before. I think there's been an awful lot of Americans arguing against this policy in America. We didn't just need your young speaker to go off telling everybody how everything the Americans do is criminal. There were a lot of Americans who were against this policy.
George
I was
Lambrakis,
against this policy.
we're running out of time.
I am
I'd like to
against
hone
this
in on our
policy.
last
It
viewer
happens
comment if we
sometimes.
can.
A
I'm
lot
sorry to
of
jump in.
governments, including
Arif
the
Hussein is our
Iranian one,
commenter
torture people.
on the Facebook
Lots
page.
of
If we can
people
get that on the
torture
screen,
people.
just to get an idea of what some of our other viewers think about these assassination drones that are practiced by the U.S. If we can get that going on the screen right now, I would appreciate it. This one is by Arif Hussein. The U.S. government is equally dangerous for the people of the U.S.
Equally dangerous for the people of the U.S. and the world outside. Their war isn't against a specific community, rather against humanity and human values.
Caleb Maupin, in closing, over to you. 30 seconds, please.
Well, there was one thing that their guest said, which
He
I agree
agrees
with,
with
which
him.
is that
I
there are
don't.
millions of Americans who oppose the policies that are coming out. There are millions of people living in the United States who do oppose the policies. They are being implemented to serve Wall Street, and that is why millions of people are hating the government in the United States. That's why there's mass protests and demonstrations like the Occupy movement, and that is absolutely the truth. And people need to stand up, and they need to be in the streets, and they need to stand with the people of the world
Well, the
against
Occupy
Wall Street and
movement,
the
I
bankers
agree with
and
the
fight for
Occupy
peace,
movement.
jobs,
It has
democracy,
nothing to do with
equality, and
this
all the
issue.
things that the CIA attempts to rob from people around the world. Well, we need to stand with the people of the world and fight for justice.
Very well. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Let me thank our guest, former U.S. diplomat George Lambrakis there from London. Thank you for your comments. And Caleb Maupin, thank you from New York. He's from the International Action Center. And thank you for watching another edition of The Debate. Any questions or comments, newsroom@presstv.ir is our email address. From Miko Betahwe and the entire team in the capital, Tehran, it's goodbye.